Negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine have officially stopped, and now all sides have begun to reveal the whole truth about what went on behind the scenes at these meetings. Donald Trump publicly stated that the war in Ukraine is not his war. He is distancing himself. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the United States is increasing pressure on Ukraine regarding the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region, and that Russia is putting forward a similar position at the same time. In the absence of progress in negotiations, Washington directly threatened Kyiv that Washington would stop taking part in the diplomatic process and shift to other strategic priorities, particularly the Middle East. Moreover, Zelensky himself admitted that yes, the United States of America literally demanded to give Donbas to the dictator Putin in exchange for security guarantees. Meanwhile, the Kremlin directly stated that they are determined to keep fighting, since the negotiations have reached a dead end and there is no point in continuing. Meanwhile, in Europe, they said that Trump did everything he could and just left. Well, that's obviously a lie too, because Trump lifted sanctions on Russians. Today, it was also confirmed that the Pentagon decided to stop part of the arms supplies to Ukraine and send them to the Middle East. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to support this YouTube channel with a donation, a subscription, or a YouTube sponsorship. Links and instructions are in this video's description. I appreciate any support you can give. Well, you can support at the end of this episode if you think it was interesting and useful for you. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Donald Trump said directly today that Russia's war against Ukraine is not his war. And right away, he threatened Europeans with consequences for not helping him in the war against Iran. Quote, "I heard Germany's leaders say this is not our war, meaning Iran. I replied, well, Ukraine is not our war either, but we helped. I considered this statement extremely inappropriate, but he made it and now he can't erase it. We are in Europe to protect Europe from Russia. In theory, this doesn't concern us. We have the majority, a big, wide, beautiful ocean. Let me say right away that Germany's leader, that is Friedrich Merz, never made such a statement. It was made by the German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, but that's not all. Later, Trump made a mysterious statement that in a few months, Europeans would deeply regret not helping the US in the war against Iran. Because something is definitely going to happen and the US will not get involved in a war in Europe." End quote. "I'm very disappointed in NATO. This was a test for NATO. They weren't obligated to help us, but they could have, and we will remember that. We will remember this in a few months, mark my words. I said 25 years ago that NATO is a paper tiger. But what's more important is that they will come to help themselves, but they will never come to help us. They didn't help us, and now everyone wants to help. When Iran is destroyed." What's important is Trump's statement in the context of negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, and the news isn't very good. Trump has started to publicly show his deep-seated resentment toward Ukraine. The President of the United States today reposted an article from Just the News. It's an online publication. On the social network Truth Social, the article claims that Ukraine allegedly tried to interfere in the American elections, specifically in Joe Biden's re-election campaign, in 2024, citing information available to the editorial staff. Intercepted messages from the Ukrainian government in 2022 by American intelligence. Quote, U.S. intelligence intercepted Ukrainian government communications, in which a plan to redirect hundreds of millions of dollars from American taxpayers was discussed, allocated for the development of clean energy in war-torn Ukraine to the U.S. The goal was to finance the election campaign of then-President Joe Biden for 2024 and the Democratic National Committee. The article states that allegedly the government of Ukraine and some unspecified U.S. government officials, through USAID in Kyiv, developed a certain plan according to which the U.S., from its budget, would allocate aid to Ukraine worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This money would supposedly come to Kyiv for the development of clean energy. And you know how Trump quote-unquote loves clean energy. And from Kyiv, this money supposedly wouldn't go to clean energy. It would be immediately sent back to the US. for Joe Biden's election campaign, which would take place 2 years later. That's basically it. Well, according to the scheme, the money would still be spent in Ukraine, but not completely. In short, it's a tricky scheme. And it's written in such a way that these payments are impossible.
It would have to be tracked.
But the whole point is that in this same article, closer to the end, it says that, first of all, Tulsi Gabbard is the Director of National Intelligence. Apparently, she just found those messages. She sent them for verification, and so far, nothing has been found there. And secondly, here's an interesting point. This is the same publication. At the end of this very article, it writes the following, quote, "Sources close to the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, expressed the idea to help Trump's Department of Justice in the investigation of previous attempts by the Ukrainian oligarch Mykola Zlochevsky to gain favor with the Biden family by hiring Hunter Biden as a board member and legal advisor to the energy company Burisma Holdings starting in 2014. The assistance offered by Volodymyr Zelensky included organizing cooperation with certain Ukrainian witnesses who could help to the Trump administration to resolve outstanding issues regarding possible corrupt operations of the Biden family abroad." The article is woven from two contradictory reports. Some say that Zelensky, on the contrary, was trying to receive help from Biden and then send it back to him so that he could win the elections. And in the second part of this article, it says that Zelensky's people offered Trump, on the contrary, to get to the truth and supposedly sink Joe Biden in his corruption scandals. That's basically it. But now, when negotiations to end the war in Ukraine are clearly at a dead end, a great deal of very important information has emerged. Well, for example, earlier, President Zelensky publicly confirmed the information from Ukrainska Pravda that the United States is increasing pressure on Ukraine regarding the possible withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Donetsk region. Moreover, Moscow is simultaneously promoting a similar position. As sources indicate, the American side still does not see any real common ground with Ukraine on the key issue of the further presence of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Donetsk region. In this regard, the US is considering the option of withdrawing from the negotiation process in order to focus on the Middle East, plus in the upcoming congressional elections. At the same time, according to sources, Washington is signaling its readiness to provide Ukraine with some significant security guarantees in exchange for Ukrainian forces leaving the territory of Donbas, basically giving it to Putin. Moreover, sources admitted that the current format of negotiations is largely based on agreements that have been reached during the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Anchorage in August of last year. It is precisely these developments that the Russian side constantly refers to, which in fact hinders the development of a full-fledged dialogue with Ukraine. Sources also describe the situation as formally a trilateral one. However, in reality, the discussion each time turns into something else. It goes back to the previously agreed approaches between Trump and Putin. In particular, it is said that the American representatives, Witkoff and Kushner, constantly at every meeting insisted on the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Donetsk and Luhansk regions as a basic condition for further agreements. Although Stephen Witkoff, I remind you, publicly said, "No, what are you talking about? That never happened, I demanded. No, I never demanded that. No, what are you talking about?" The point of all the recent rounds of negotiations came down to an attempt to force Ukraine to give Donbas to the bold, stinking dictator Putin, and the Americans openly started to put pressure on Kyiv. At the same time, the press secretary of the President of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Peskov, admitted that the issue of Donbas remained critical and everything else was just excuses, quote. Indeed, during the rounds of trilateral negotiations that took place, it was possible to make some progress toward a settlement. But the main issues that are of critical interest to the stinking Russian side still have not been agreed upon. Issues such as territorial ones. This is the main topic for discussion. There has been no progress on them. There still isn't any. Meanwhile, the Pentagon stated that it is considering the possibility of redirecting weapons intended for Ukraine to the Middle East, because the war with Iran is depleting the supplies of some of the most important US munitions. Later, Trump literally confirmed this publicly and officially. A quote from Donald Trump. "Yes, we do this all the time. We have a huge amount of munitions. They are in other countries, for example, in Germany and all over Europe. Everything is packed there. And sometimes we take from one place and use it for another. I mean, we take from Ukraine and use it against Iran. I'll explain this whole scheme in more detail in the next episode, so subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. And friends, just a reminder, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation, subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. Links and info are in this video's description. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.